thing about myself, and it will be. I don't need to kind of explain, the importance of sustainability. We have seen, the business landscape is changing, our industries are changing, our sectors are changing, and I think there's a lot of sustainability no longer a buzzword. This is something, the integrated part of our kind of work and the business and the society that we live in, and I think this, like any other kind of the kind of important topic, this is one of the most kind of important topic in our kind of modern world, where leaders, politicians, the organization, business, they're all kind of they're talking about the sustainability. But also we have a lot of kind of negative voice. Like this morning when I was reading in the newspaper, yeah, BP oil, they have they slashed their investment in green investment. So this was quite shocking to hear, like there are things going on. But I think it's on the rise. Sustainability is on the rise. We have seen it. It's all the sectors are kind of they're really much they're promoting the idea of sustainability. There are sustainability carriers, sustainability departments. The lots of range of business are actually promoting the sustainability carrier. So I think that's the kind of point. And I was so delighted to see our panelists when I was reading the kind of biographies, small biographies, and I think I was very kind of inspired to hear how much contribution they are making. And I think it's such a inspiring thing to see for myself as well, that these are the people who are really making the change in our societies, in our communities. And that's why I would like to kind of to hear them more rather than me talking all the time. So I think what I will do basically kind of the briefly introduce our kind of the panel on my end, and I think then I'll ask kind of my panel to kind of they tell me more about themselves. So first we have Dr. Liz Barron Majerik, MB. She's comes from Scotland. She's a director for LANTRA, promoting skills in land-based aquaculture and environmental conservation. I think she has various role in different kind of in Scotland. We will hear more from Liz when she sort of speaks about that. Then on the second on the panels, we have Dougie Knox. He represents the Scottish Offshore Wind Energy Council's skill groups, and they are promoting careers in offshore wind. And he really inspires students to consider diverse roles in the fast-growing industry. Then on the third on the panel, like in the third panelist, we have Zarina Ahmad, environmental leader, and they've been part of the Women Hour 2020 Hour Plan list. She increases ethnic minorities' participation in environmentalism, and she's doing PhD in Manchester University on sustainable behaviors within BM communities. And she's involved in kind of food justice project in the UK. And fourth, Amy Oroko. She's a sustainability manager at Mathew Algie, a Glasgow-based coffee roaster. She coordinates sustainable sourcing, their net zero by 2040 ambition, and community engagement. So, I mean, this is just like a brief introduction. What I would like to do now, if I can, if our panelists can really, they enhance, their kind of background, and what they're doing. So that's the sort of like, but also I think what really inspired you to sort of go into this, kind of, the job and work that you're doing, and which is really inspiring, I have to say again. So I think we can start with Liz, Dr. Liz, if you can, they start first.
Yeah, happy to start. My inspiration was actually my mum. She was a flower arranger, and she used to drag me around the Scottish hills and countryside to get greenery for weddings. So I was always around plants. Still hate ivy. That's my least favourite of plants. You have to cut all that for wedding flowers. It's awful. But she seemed to know all their names, and I really wanted to know more about the plants and how they worked, which is why I ended up studying plant science. And although I love my degree, I really think I should have got some more work experience first and really thought about what it was and what kind of jobs would have involved working with plants. But I think there's quite often a bit of a steer, particularly for girls, to try and learn as much as they possibly can about a sector before they then start looking for work in that area. So I ended up doing some research when I finished my degree. I think I had in my head that I was going to go off into the jungle and find different herb remedies to convert into different medicines. I've got a terrible sense of direction, don't have a brilliant attention span, and can't cope with high temperatures. So all of that didn't happen. That wasn't the career path I ended up following. But ended up doing some environmental chemistry work and ended up working for the University of the Highlands and Islands, and was very involved in the teaching there, but also in the curriculum management. What happens when you're in a further education or tertiary providers, you tend to get moved to whatever department's on fire at the time and fix the problems, and then you get moved on to the next one. And when I eventually took over the reins of the forestry school, it felt like I'd come home. It was brilliant. That really was probably where I should have tried to get a job in the first place. But I wasn't aware of the career options in forestry at that time. I think everyone just thought, well, that's what the forestry does. And equally, when I started to look more into it, it was very like the early days of STEM. There's so much opportunity within the land-based and nature-based sectors, so many different careers of all sorts of different backgrounds and levels, whether it's engineering or whether it's science or whether it's animal care, for example, or the plant science that I was most interested in. But I think they tend to be thought of as what you do when you can't do anything else, or lower skilled requirements, and it's totally not the case. So then I moved to LANTRA, where I thought I could make more of a difference and bring these sectors together. So we're a bit like the SQA, but for everything that involves wellies. So we do very much things around the curriculum development. We look at courses, we create courses, but also we work with employers to help make sure that they are supported in taking on apprentices or finding the skills and training opportunities for their staff. We work with government and agencies as well to help inform policy decisions that they might be making that might be impacting on the more remote and rural sectors, and particularly the skills needs of those sectors. And I get to work with kids as well, and with yourselves, and to raise awareness of careers. So it's a great opportunity, it's a great role. And I think in terms of sustainability, I think, really we work with the greenest of sectors, both literally, because you don't get much greener than the sectors, but also in terms of the impact that an individual can make. I mean, some of our the folk that we work with are really working. The mountain is their office. You can't have a bigger skill than that, really. And you get to bring your dog to work frequently as well, which is a big bonus. That also helps us with the school's pitches too. So yes, I think that's kind of where I've come from, and I look forward to answering any questions that anybody might have today, particularly relating to land-based or nature-based careers.
Thank you, Liz. That's great to hear, the kind of wider introduction. So next, I'd like to kind of invite Dougie Knox. If you can, they explain your work and what do you do, and what really inspired you to kind of, to be involved in your work.
Thanks very much. Afternoon, everybody. So my name's Douglas Knox, and I work for a company called ESP, which is Energy Skills Partnership, based in Scotland, and we work in a kind of space between government, industry and education on skills. So there's pushes and pulls within that, government initiatives to meet net zero ambitions. There is industry requirements for skills within the industry, and the educational part in the middle to try and meet these demands at the right time. So it's a bit of a juggling act. Certainly qualification wise, I'm involved with qualification bodies such as SQA, and sustainability has now become part of these qualifications. So it's mandatory. Apprentices coming through or apprenticeship schemes now study sustainability within that because it's required everywhere. And that spills over into the work that goes beyond that. My journey to where I got to is probably quite strange. I never intended really to be here. It's entirely by accident. Prior to working for ESP, I was about 15 years in further education, doing lecturing and engineering and senior management laterally, and then moved into Energy Skills Partnership. And prior to that, it was engineering again, particularly in motorsport. So I was a complete petrol head, motorcycle racing, tuning engines, and I've come from a very different background. But even me with my passion for motorsport, I'm completely sold on the idea of electrical power now in vehicles. And it's taken a while. It's been a seismic change. When I was younger, electric vehicles were milk carts, and that maybe gives away how old I actually am. But no, they have moved on. Technology's moved on. The amount of innovation that's taken place over the past few decades is huge as we move away from carbon fuels, fossil fuels, into the renewable energy sector. And that's why I'm here today, kind of with a SOWEC hat on. So you maybe not heard of that. It's Scottish Offshore Wind Energy Council. And that was to do with Scotland, 19 projects off the coast of Scotland, which is to deliver 30 gigawatts of energy by the mid-2030s. And that's to meet Scotland's net zero ambitions for 2045. To put that into some sort of context, 1 gigawatt is approximately 750,000 homes for 1 year. So that's an awful lot of power to be produced in a short period of time. And that isn't just, so the initial short-term goal for that is by 2030 is 11 gigawatts of power delivered off offshore wind. Currently there's onshore wind, which is running about 10 gigawatts just now, and that is to be doubled to 20 gigawatts by about 2030 as well. So we've got onshore wind, we've got offshore wind, we've got solar, and we've got all the power generation that already exists within the sector. So there's an awful lot going on there. SOWEC itself was government set up with industry, and it's to meet the needs of industry and working with education in order to fill these gaps. And when you need a skilled person in a workplace, you can't just automatically create them. It takes years of forward planning for that. So it takes years to get an apprenticeship completed. It gets years to get a degree or a master's completed to get these people into the workplace. And I suppose today it's just to highlight some of the opportunities that are available within the offshore wind sector and the wider renewables sector. The UK between 2025 and 2029 is estimated that the workforce for offshore wind will increase from around 9,000 to 40,000. So that's at UK level. The bulk of these, or about half of these, will be in Scotland. Scotland are leading the world almost in offshore wind. We have other nations coming to Scotland to say, how do you do this? What systems do you have in place? What's the skills process for getting into that? And on a Scottish basis, we're probably looking at 20,000 people in Scotland by about 2030 to join the offshore energy sector. There will be a reduction in oil and gas workers within that area. The biggest areas of growth are offshore wind and floating and fixed bottom. A little bit of carbon capture and storage, some hydrogen will be in there as well, and offshore electrification, but there's huge opportunities there. And just before I tie up, there's a couple of different stages to the projects that are taking place, and they can be broken down into 5 stages. And I can put something in the chat about this. So you've got the planning and development stage, the manufacturing and fabrication stage, installation and commission, operation and maintenance, and decommissioning is the final part of that. And that decommissioning part is built into the design in the first place. So you've got a sustainable circular economy. And what skills are currently required within offshore wind? I'll just go through these very quickly. Engineering, all disciplines, planning, which includes geography, geology, procurement, project management, naval architecture, surveyors, auditors, data science, environmental science, financial, stakeholder engagement, and public relations. So many wide areas that can be covered by this. And what I would say as well is it's a very young sector. It's diverse. The gender ratio of male to female is much higher than traditional power generation. Some of the companies that are working within that sector are very large, and they have the ability to sponsor non-UK students into employment. So there really are some great opportunities there. I think I've spoken enough now, so thank you very much for your time so far.
Thank you so much. You gave very detailed the overview, and it's great to hear that there are opportunities. And I think this is very the good for our student here that there are opportunities within the the sector. So next up we have third panelist Zarina Ahmad. So if you can just explain your work, and then what really inspired you to get involved in this the very great work that you're doing.
Thank you. So I work for an environmental organisation called the Women's Environmental Network. So I work there, which is based in London, but it's now becoming a national organization, and part of my role is now to make this organization more national. And the work is like linking in aspects of gender, race, disability to the climate agenda, thinking about like climate justice, thinking about just transition, and thinking about whose voices are missing and whose perspectives are missing. And that work came out of the work that I did previously, which was I founded the Ethnic Minority Environmental Network in Scotland. And again, that was like connecting racial justice with climate justice. Now, where did that all start off with? So that is like, I didn't do a degree in any environmental qualifications. As a child, similar to Liz, I was always interested in the environment. I was one of these like geeky kids, not geeky kids, but you know, a kid that would go out into the forest, into the woods, and talk to the trees and talk to the plants. I believe that they all had a soul. For me, I suppose that's where my environmentalist love came from. However, in a world that wasn't really geared for that, it was more about you work and you become successful, and success was measured on having a big house and having a big car, was the world that I grew up in, right? So I grew up thinking I'm going to become a doctor or a lawyer, you know, a very traditional Asian kind of aspiration. And I chose to become a psychologist because I thought, okay, I'm rebelling a little bit here by becoming a psychologist. So I did a degree in psychology, worked for the education department for a little while, ended up working as a property developer, so worked in a very capitalistic money-making field, and I just didn't get satisfaction, right? And it took me a long time, so it wasn't just overnight. It took me years of being in a job where I worked for money, and it was at one point I had a midlife, what I would describe as an assessment, not a crisis, an assessment where I like took stock of my life and thought, well, what am I really passionate about? What drives me? What are my values? And I started to pursue that. And yes, maybe I had, and I didn't have a life of privilege. So it wasn't somebody who could just stop working. I was a single parent with 3 kids. So it was a risk I took in my life. But it was a risk that I do not look back on at all now. So I ended up working for a charity, so which sometimes is referred to as the third sector. And I worked on a community trust in East Asia, working on a climate-related project, right? And it was similar. It was like something that I kind of fell into, but also like pursued. But it wasn't something that I thought about as like when I was at university, that this is somewhere where I'm going to end up. And what was interesting was that a conversation I had with a Green member party who actually made a very racist comment and said to me that your kind don't grow, do they? And for me, that was a moment where I thought, hold on, what is this environmental sector? Looking around me, I opened up my eyes and actually noticed how white the space was, and that there wasn't that much representation. And I just kept thinking, I cannot be the only person of color that actually cares about the environment, because I can't just be the only person, right? So that was when I started to pursue like looking at the environment sector and actually start to connect it with like racial justice and racial equality. So worked for a Race Equality Council, and from that led to like thinking about the intersectionality of other social justice issues, which then obviously looking at my own positionality, person who I am, being a woman, and thinking about like gender and race and disability within these spaces, is now that I work for the Women's Environmental Network. Now, regarding jobs in this field, what does that mean and what does that look like? To be in the third sector is challenging, is difficult, right? Sometimes people think these are easy jobs to get because you don't necessarily need the traditional qualifications to get into them, because a lot of these jobs rely on like lived experiences matter a lot more. However, you give 100% of your time, your passion, your drive, everything you have to these projects. And that's why projects become really successful, but they're not well paid, right? So you balance it with like the love of what you want to do and the value of what you want to do to actually being monetarily getting like a monetary value back on that. So that is a difficult, and that is always challenging, because, you know, in this world, we need money to live on. However, the satisfaction that you get from the third sector is immense, right? And maybe the third sector needs to look at itself and think about, well, how do we value people in the third sector a lot better compared to like the private or the public sector, which are much better paid. But there are so many opportunities within the third sector, and there's so many transferable skills within the third sector, which I think like people in communications, media studies, right, and telling the stories of like climate impacts, or how climate, you know, is going, like for some people it's something that's happening in the future, for other people it's been happening for years back, you know, in different parts of the world. So it's like connecting those stories. So thinking about like media and the story that you can tell through communication and media is important. Then there's things like science. So thinking about like climate science, how is it translated to the everyday person? And this is where that bridges between community and science. And then there's policy campaigning and advocacy as well with the third sector. So there are so many opportunities within the sector. And so please do look at like WEN's website, because we have so many projects on there and so many resources. And that can actually make you start thinking about, well, how do I fit in? And the other part is one of the projects that I was involved in was the Climate Sisters project, which is about amplifying and bringing marginalised and racialised women's voices to COP26. And what I found interesting about this was the legacy of this project, because there was 12 women that were involved, and they were all people that never actually thought about climate, you know, working in the sector or being involved in the sector, but actually got really involved. And what they've done is like used their interest, their passion, their experience of being in COP to actually make a change in their workforce. So for instance, there's somebody who works for an IT company. Now she heads a sustainability team at the IT company. So it's like, how do you bring in like your passion and your drive for the environment into your different areas of your work? And that was also like, it's been like an interesting journey. So yeah, but I can talk more about specifics, so I'll pass it over now.
No, thank you so much, Zarina. Very inspiring, very interesting, and I can see the determination in you. And also, it's good to hear that there are lots of opportunities. You know, the first students to get enrolled. So we have our, you know, the fourth panelist, Amy Oroko. So if you can please tell us about your work, your involvement, and then what really inspired you to kind of, you know, they get into this work.
Sure. Yeah, great to be involved with this with some other panelists who are kind of giving a great insight from other angles. Yeah, so I'm sustainability manager at Mathew Algie. A bit more info on Mathew Algie. We are a coffee roaster primarily, although we do offer other products to customers such as tea and biscuits and coffee machines and kind of everything that goes along with a coffee offering to the out-of-home sector. So we basically only sell to cafes and restaurants and hotels and that kind of setting. So you maybe haven't seen our brand, but if you're a coffee drinker, you've probably had our coffee when you're out and about on the high streets. And yeah, so we have a whole range of products, but we also offer a range of services to our customers, for example, for fixing coffee machines if they break, or training baristas to make really excellent coffees as well. That's kind of our offering to the market, if you like. And yeah, we were founded by Mathew Algie, who started the business over 160 years ago. So we have a long history here in Glasgow. But we were purchased by a German coffee roaster called Chibo in 2016. And so now our kind of UK and Ireland operations have all been officially merged with Chibo. So that makes us a slightly larger business than we were previously. We now have about 450 employees in total. Some of them obviously based here at Glasgow at our roastery, but you also have offices in Epsom, just south of London, and in Lisbon over in Ireland as well. So yeah, and obviously as well, some of the people who are employed by us are field-based, so they're people, our sales team or our trainers who are actually based kind of regionally supporting different customers of ours. So yeah, lots of different roles in the company in general. In terms of a quick introduction to myself, I started with Mathew Algie just over 10 years ago, actually, so I've been here for quite a long time now, seen a lot of changes, obviously, with the Chibo takeover. I manage just a very small sustainability team, yes, so that's our entire focus. We sit practically within the operations team in the company, and more specifically within the kind of technical or quality department. So that's why I'm afraid there might be a bit of background noise, because we are doing some coffee roasting down in the coffee lab just now. But hopefully that's not too disruptive. Yeah, so I literally sit next to colleagues who are responsible for tasting the coffee samples as they come in or go out of the factory, and make sure that they all taste they should, which is great. There's plenty of coffee on tap here. And then, yeah, prior to Mathew Algie, I did my undergraduate basically in economics and international development. So sounds like a relatively similar course actually to the one at EWS. And as part of that, I did a year in industry. It's really common at the University of Bath, where I studied, to do a year in industry. So most courses have that kind of built in. And for my year, I did a year abroad. I worked in Malawi for a development consultancy. So I was basically working on loads of different projects, especially as the intern. I kind of got to sample all the different things the consultancy was working on, which is really excellent for just growing my knowledge and understanding. And it was obviously in a whole range of different projects, but a main theme that stuck out to me as being really interesting was about connecting farmers with international markets, and the role that the private sector plays in ensuring that farmers farmers all across the world get a good deal for what they're manufacturing, and also the impact of companies choosing to prioritize sustainability in their sourcing decisions. So I guess I came out of that placement, and then I did a further year of consulting after uni as well, looking for a role in the private sector that would help me to feed into that industry and basically have an impact in the way that a company chooses to make sourcing decisions, hopefully to prioritize more sustainable decisions, I guess. So yeah, our remit in terms of our sustainability team here at MA is basically planning our strategy or goals in terms of sustainability, and our reporting against that. So we produce sustainability reports to kind of showcase what we're hoping to achieve, and reflecting back on what we have achieved, and trying to communicate that well to our stakeholders, so to customers and things. Our strategy is formed mainly around some key areas, including obviously sustainable sourcing of coffee and the other products that we buy, reducing our environmental impact, engaging our employees here as well, so trying to encourage the employees and my colleagues around us in choosing more sustainable behaviours, and then investing in our community as well. So that kind of social piece around what are we doing as a company to give back to our society and to the community more broadly. And in general, I guess our projects can fall into two different categories. We do increasingly work on compliance. So there's various different pieces of EU legislation or UK legislation that we have to meet the requirements for. So one main piece of work for us this year is around some EU legislation called the EU deforestation regulation. So from the end of this year onwards, we're going to have to do basically prove that any coffee that we buy that we're exporting to EU has been made on farms where deforestation hasn't taken place. So it's a really good principle, but actually the logistics of proving that is quite interesting, and is involving lots of different people in the company to kind of document that and make sure that we're ready to do those, to provide that proof on export. So I'm working to kind of coordinate that internally. And then the other aspect that's not compliance focused is more to do with innovating our approach to sustainability, and hopefully driving that competitive advantage. So in comparison to our competitors, hopefully we're proving we are going above and beyond to make ourselves more sustainable as a company. So yeah, just quickly to talk a bit more about each of those themes in a bit more detail. So from a sourcing perspective, Mathew Algie is quite well known in the industry for our commitment to using certifications such as Fair Trade. We were the first roaster in the UK to launch Fair Trade espresso, and to launch a triple certified espresso as well after that. So that's Rainforest Alliance Organic and fair trade. So we still use certifications really extensively in our range, but we also have long-term partnerships with coffee producers around the world, which mean we have full traceability, obviously, and also helps us to work collaboratively with our suppliers on projects. So another big part of my job is to plan collaborations with coffee cooperatives to help provide some mutual benefits. So it could be projects working on kind of income diversification strategies for smallholders, or it could be looking at how they can reduce their environmental impact on coffee farms. Yeah, that kind of thing. Increasingly as well, our work in this area is influenced by human rights legislation and requirements that we have to meet for certifications. So because we're quite a small sustainability, the job includes human rights related issues. So it's things like making sure there's, how do we make sure that we're doing our utmost to make sure there's no modern slavery in our supply chains as well. And then more recently, we've launched our ambition to be net zero by 2040. So this has obviously helped us to really sharpen our focus on what our carbon footprinting is, where are the key hotspots in our supply chain in terms of emission, and how can we be working with our suppliers to reduce our emissions. And then finally, that community piece. So we do quite a bit of work with wildlife and wild places charities, also do quite a bit of volunteering or fundraising, so getting employees involved in that as much as possible. And then we also have a strand around engaging young people in encouraging them to get into coffee industry and things. So that's kind of a big picture summary of things that I work on. So it's a real mixed bag of stuff, but I do love having a really diverse workload. And I suppose that if that links into the skills piece, we're often if we're looking to recruit into the sustainability team, we're really looking for people who do love a diverse workload, people who are good communicators, good at influencing others as well, so able to communicate why something's really important and the business case for it, or the case for changing their behaviours. People who enjoy managing projects, and also obviously people who are good at kind of critically evaluating information, including data management and things like that, because that comes quite a lot, for example, on the carbon footprinting side or different things like that. So that's a flavour, I guess, of the kind of things we look for.
Thank you so much, Amy. It looks like you have a very busy job. very busy routine. There's so many diverse things going on, and I think again, glad to see the passion and determination that you're kind of doing with passion and inspiring others too. And I really like the statement when you said giving back to the society, giving back to the community. I think that's a bigger kind of note in all for kind of panelists. It's all about thinking about the others, thinking about the society, thinking about our planet, our home, basically. So I think time-wise we are perfect. We have around 45 minutes for the question and answer from student and staff. So how are we gonna do it? If you want to have a question, if you want to ask a question directly, you can come to the mic. You can use the kind of mic function, or you can write in the chat. You can ask a general question, which any of the panel member can take, or maybe you can ask a specific panel member to a specific question. So I think it's over to you, students, and anyone in this call. So we have a good time left. So I think so many interesting things we have heard. So it's all about let's bring your kind of burning question and let's have that discussion. It's an open forum, so any questions welcome at this stage. So over to you, anyone who would like to kind of come forward for any questions. Nigel, yes?
Yeah, so it's not so much a question, it's just to say if students or staff have got a question, raise your hand on Teams so that we can see that you've got a question, because there may be a queue of people. Hopefully there'll be a queue of people. So yeah, raise your hand and we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Okay, so we have one question from Prata. Yeah, on you go. You can ask the question.
Hi everyone, I am Pratha Basnet. I'm originally from Nepal. I am currently a master's student in USW London campus. I'm pursuing master's in public administration. And firstly, thank you very much for organizing such a wonderful panel event. And whenever there is this TRUM or any event regarding sustainability, I am like very much passionate about things into it, wanting to learn and grow into this field. And with the expertise here, with the panel I have here, I'm very much delighted, and I have listed a bunch of questions to ask each one of you. Since regarding, I would go with, first of all, Zarina. Uh, your discussion really touched my heart because the way you interpreted your experience, like you were not, you did not get your education in environment. So basically, my background is that I did my bachelor's in law and art, but that did not align my interest in law. So I came to London thinking that the only thing that I would get interested is sustainability and the environment. And with that, while you said that you were having a midlife crisis, the same thing happened to me as well. While back, I was in Nepal. I did my bachelor's in law, and with that, I had deep passionate about sustainability market in in context of textile based industry. So, with my passion and interest in COVID and COVID 2019, I did open my thrift store. It's a second-hand thrift store. It was the first physical thrift store back in Nepal. So, I am an entrepreneur back in home. But that did not yet light up the spirit of what I was actually valuing of my interest. So, I came to London studying for the Masters of Public Administration. I saw the specific topic of UN SDGs. But yet, I was more into studying policies rather than studying what practical knowledge I will be gaining towards sustainability. So, my first question to you is, how did you are there for a graduate, a freshly graduate who is willing to pursue career in sustainability? Like sustainability is a very vague term related to the very vague area that is environment. Yeah. So you guys are expert in various areas of sustainability. So are there any specific let me see. I have a bunch of questions that I've listed down to ask the panels. And how do you see sustainability evolving in industries like fashion, especially in textile industries, where environmental impact is growing concern? That is my first question.
Right. Okay, so with your first question, which is great, and I love to hear your passion, and like people like yourself are just like the people that I really love connecting with, because it's like, you know, it's what we find is like we end up doing jobs because we think they're the right jobs to do, right? But we miss out on our passion and our values and our core values. And a lot of people's core values are around about like justice and like, you know, and like thinking about the environment and us being part of one ecosystem. And fashion industry is a huge industry that sometimes gets really escalated in SDGs and Sustainable Development Goals, because it comes into like that economic development space. So it gets really highlighted, but also the impacts of it actually then get disregarded very quickly, right? Is that impact of like the environmental industry sometimes gets hidden, I would say, because it's such a big industry and it's all about like economic growth, right? And this is where we have to change some of the narratives and like having like younger, different perspectives, people that can come to the forefront and thinking about, well, where are those like spaces to actually start creating changes? And those spaces can be in different places. So it could be in that policy space where it's very, very missing, right? And policy don't like to have, what's the word I'm thinking of? It's like they don't like to rock the boat too much. It's like a slow burner, right? So if you can be part of that slow burning process and working on the inside, great. And then there's the actual industry itself. Like I knew somebody who wanted to do sustainable clothing, and she took like everything she did, she like looked at like where the textile was coming, made sure that, you know, that it wasn't like slave trading, it was just like, you know, like ethical way of like conducting the business, but also sustainable and not having an impact on the environment, like the dyes and, you know, the pollutants and all of these things. And what she found was when she was labeling her products as being sustainable, people weren't buying them people weren't as interested. So she had to take the label off. But this is going back 10 years and things have changed and people's perceptions are different. So it's about nudging the market, finding the right market for your, like, you know, for your work. So she had to like change the way she was thinking about marketing, who she was marketing it to. But she didn't change what she wanted to do. She didn't change her values. She kept her values. So it's thinking about like the actual textile industry, thinking about the bigger players, because there's big players that you'll be competing against as well within the textile industry that have a bigger voice. So it's like bringing in, like for me, a lot of case studies. So like bringing in real case studies of how people like have made the change, people that are impacted by the industry, and providing an alternative vision. I think that's always the hardest, is having this alternative vision on how we can do things differently, and getting people to buy into that is being like that inspirational leader. Somebody spoke about it earlier on. I think it was Dougie that mentioned it, like being that person that can inspire people is really, really key, because I think you do need to bring people on. So I think it's like looking to see, well, where do you fit in? Right, and where can you make that difference? And it might be that you try one thing, one avenue, and you get blocked, and it might be that you have to like jump ship and go into a different way, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But just, I would just say keep following your passion and drive, and don't let it be diluted.
So having said that, sorry.
Go on, brother. Yeah, go on.
So having said that, from all around the expertise you guys are from, are there any emerging opportunity in Scotland or globally for a graduate who wants to work on sustainability policies within the fashion industries? It's for everyone.
So any panel members, would you like to comment, or?
Yeah, so I can comment, right? So a lot of the where it's emerging is like actually with universities. So like doing the right degree at the universities is really, because they link you up with industry, right? So I know like with UWS, UCL in London, Glasgow Caledonian University. So the ones that are like now pushing for like putting sustainability on the agenda. And it's like linking up like the courses at the university with policy and advocacy. And there is that potential there for that work to be done, because our policy spaces they look to people with academic backgrounds in like policy as well. So there is that space, and also government, like looking at civil servant spaces and like finding jobs within the civil servant. And that's where you can start making the difference as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prada. So we got a couple of questions in the chat room. So one of the question is actually one of the student, Precious, someone who done MBA in logistic and supply chain management, and she's very inspired by the sustainability itself. But one of the question is really, how can they start the career? Because they have finished a degree, they already have that inspiration. They want to kind of, they go into sustainability. So, and do you have any advice for like someone who just want to kind of step into their kind of first career into sustainability? So that's anyone basically.
I could, Nigel, I could come in on that if you wish. I suppose for the offshore wind sector, it's not initially obvious how you enter the sector, and a lot of that just now is being done through formats like LinkedIn. People being on LinkedIn and reaching out and connecting that way. So there isn't a kind of one-stop shop where you can connect with people and do that. It's something that SOWEC are working on. There's a couple of initiatives taking place. One is a skills portal, which is for companies so that they can go in and access information. And we're hoping to have an engagement tool attached to that, where individuals could go in and put in the skills that they have, the area that they're looking to be involved in, and it will match them to existing vacancies that are within these areas. Like I say, that's aspirational. So just now, a lot of it's done by word by mouth. Looking at the question and the comment there, I think you've got, you know, fantastic qualifications, an MBA in logistics and supply chain management. The wind industry, the energy sector is crying out for people within the supply chain. And a lot of people that enter the supply chain don't have the exact qualifications for that. They may have an accountancy background, a finance background, a project management background, and they find themselves being in the supply chain and applying their knowledge and their abilities to that. The same with project managers. They don't always have project management qualifications. They have a qualification in an area and then apply that in theory. A lot of what I'm hearing from the people within the renewable sector, the energy sector, is that it's more about the person than the exact qualification. It's if they have the ability to communicate, the agility, the drive, the personnel skills, and just be adaptable for that. It's a very new sector, and it's really, really exciting. And when you walk into a room of maybe petrochemical engineers and gas engineers from years ago, it was predominantly white males with grey hair that was in the room. That's completely changed. From what I'm seeing, we had a couple of events that we ran with UHI with young panelists, graduates within the energy sector, and the talent that was on show was absolutely frightening. And these were young people coming into the sector who were working often remotely. So they weren't working on a site, they were working from home, working remotely, and able to use their skills in that manner. So, you know, I think I can put some information in the chat, if that's okay, Nigel. I've got some SDS links, Skills Development Scotland links to some of the information on the sector and the jobs that exist within that. And I've also got a link that we used at the UWS event last year, and it's a QR code where you can go in, and that'll take you to the SOWEC site for Scotland, and it's got, I think, about 18 developers within the site with careers opportunities, internship opportunities, and graduate opportunities for that. So I'll drop that into the chat, and that'll give you some, if there's a sector you wanted to get into, it'll give you something to get a start on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dougie. Liz?
Yeah, just also to think about where the logistics side can reduce waste, because that's a really critical thing as well, and particularly around food waste. If you're moving from primary production to the shelf, if you like, in the supermarket, there are so many different stages on that journey that you can reduce waste and that you can have a massive impact. And there are a lot of organizations in this country who are working within the food supply chain as well. So I think that's something to think about. Also, within our sector, there's some really impactful work that's being done around waste products and turning them into things that can help to reduce waste, because it's actually got new properties or new characteristics. So looking at places on the supply chain, and I know there's a question in the chat there about when people are here from other countries and looking to try and get sponsored, that's a great place to start too. If you get involved in some kind of project with a company or an organisation where your knowledge then makes you essential to the success of that process.
Amy?
Great. Yes, I just wanted to add that a great question, and there's so much opportunity in purchasing role to have great influence on how a company operates in terms of sustainability. So I just would encourage you to look at entry-level jobs in purchasing departments and see where it takes you, especially if it's a company that you think you admire their approach. If you can look at their what they've got on their website about how they source, if you think they're, you know, likely to be motivated and doing interesting things in that area, then a purchasing job in that kind of company would be a great place to start. And I suppose the other thing just to mention is, like, you if there are companies that you really admire, it's always worth just contacting them and finding out if there's any opportunities for work experience. I wouldn't have got my first job here if I hadn't just done a blind email with a CV off to Mathew Algie, because I knew about their reputation, if you know what I mean. So it's always worth just contacting businesses and seeing what opportunities they might have, if it's just for work experience or for potential jobs and things.
Great. Zarina?
And just to add to what everybody else has said, to work for the third sector and the charity sector is also usually a good starting place for a lot of graduates, because they'll come in not knowing what area they want to take forward in terms of a career progression. So it gives them the opportunity to maybe think about waste management, to think about energy, to think about textile industry. to think about communication or policy advocacy. So it gives them that opportunity to like gain some experience, but also to like start to think and develop their own like passion and drive and think where do they fit into the sustainability sector. It's usually a third sector. It's usually a good starting place for a lot of graduates.
Great, Nigel.
Yes, it was just, in response to Precious's question there, in terms of sort of careers information, you may not be aware of the Sustainability in Your Career page on the careers website at UWS, which has got a whole series of links, some of which are sort of career related, but also specifically job related as well. So that's a good place to start as well, just kind of researching and finding out about sustainable careers. And particularly the sustainable, I think it's the Sustainable Careers Guide, which is aimed at graduates. Definitely worth a look. Lots of really useful resources and advice about, making that first start into careers in sustainability.
Okay,
so
great.
the link, we put the link in the chat there. Lindsay added that earlier on. So if you look back through the chat, you'll find Lindsay MacDonald's post. And that'll take you to the page.
Thank you, Nigel. Liz, there's a question for you. Someone is asking whether going on the route of environmental science and sustainability would be a good direction for someone who wants to go into environmental conservation. And
Yes, I've put a couple of notes into the chat as well, but it's a great subject to study, but it's really important within our sector that you get a taste for what some of that work would look like, and to the first stage in that, because it's such a huge area physically as well as in terms of the roles that exist, is to find out where you're really happy. Is it in a forest? Do you prefer to be working with animals? Is it on the water? And then looking at getting some practical experience, some volunteering experience, maybe like the short courses. There are sometimes practical training funds that are made available that can get you some practical training, and then looking at the companies that are operating in that space. So it's if you're really happy where you are, it doesn't feel like a job, and then you're much more likely to thrive within that area.
The second part of the question, I think it's an important one, because there are lots of international students studying in the UK right now. They're doing masters, undergraduate, different degrees, and I think we get the question basically like because they're on a visa, student visa, they have post-study work permit for 2 years. Often they are the one who are looking for a kind of job. So I think the next part of the question is really like someone on a student visa, what sort of companies, they can, do you think, there's a sponsorship available within the sustainability kind of, domain for international students? So that's like question for all panel member basically. So
I think, well, I got my mic off, so I'll talk first anyway, if that's okay. But it varies on different companies, obviously, and what they can provide. But through that kind of volunteering work, through getting that kind of connections with companies, whether it's asking, looking for ideas for your dissertation projects or for any work experience modules, the more that you can show that what you know and what you understand is indispensable to that company, the more effort they are to put into making sure that all that the paperwork side is organized so that they can retain your knowledge and your expertise. But equally, it's a challenging job market. Well, it's a challenging market for companies to recruit just now. So I think there's more and more of them are getting involved within that space.
Thank you. Any other comments from the panel on the?
What I would say is that with offshore, when a lot of the companies involved in that are global companies, and they seem to be in a better position to offer sponsorships because they have that experience. So within the QR code that I put in there may be companies in there that have the ability to sponsor people. It's been identified because there is a skills shortage in the sector. We need to retain people who are studying in the UK, particularly in Scotland. So if they study in Scotland, let's see if we can find them a job in Scotland on completion of their qualifications, rather than returning to their own countries or moving to another country and taking all their skills and talent with them. So it's about that talent retention. So it is being explored more widely now.
Thank you. Dougie, there's a question directly for you. So from Mark, tidal energy is largely untapped. However, in Scotland, there have been recent developments with prototypes being trialed. Through my research, it's my understanding this is more predictable and powerful means of energy. Are ESP involved in any of these projects? If not, is there any specific reason for this? You want to comment on that?
Yep, certainly. It's a good question. I've been to the Edinburgh University Fastblade test facility in Rosyth, which is testing tidal blades. And it's, really some fantastic work going on there. It's really good. And I do get the bit about it being more predictable because the tides go in and out every day, twice. And it happens. The wind doesn't always blow in Scotland, although it does feel like it does sometimes. It feels like it rains an awful lot as well. And the sun certainly doesn't shine all the time that you want it to. So I get that the tidal part is far more predictable. I think it's just a kind of the economy of scale. It's quite expensive to do it. The equipment that has to be deployed in the sea has to be very robust. From an offshore wind perspective, the wind turbines have to go through a vigorous test procedure, a really rigorous test procedure to ensure that they operate flawlessly off the coast, because it becomes very expensive. It's not like sending a transit van up to the top of a hill with a technician in it. You've got to get a transport vessel out there or a helicopter. And I think the tidal is maybe suffers from that as well. While we look at all the different ways of harnessing renewable energy, one of them usually comes to the forefront. And wind has been the one that has really come forward just now on a kind of large scale power generation system. And I totally get it. I feel slightly guilty when we're talking all about sustainability. Not everybody wants a wind turbine out their window. It doesn't look that sustainable. And if we have to take down a piece of forestry in order to do that, and what's the impact upon that? So, it is scales here. We are sustainable to an extent, but there is environmental impact on anything that you do with these things. And all these environmental studies have to take place to minimize the impact and find out a balance of it. So I suppose in answer to the question, we are not particularly involved in tidal just now. It's not a big enough sector for us. We aren't receiving enough requests for skills in these areas. So I think at university level and the research side of things and the innovation side, that's where it's sitting just now. And once these projects are proven, they will roll out further, and then the scale continues. And then it's right now we need tidal energy experts that can do this, can do that. And I think these will be cross skills as well. So it'll be using SUVs that they use for offshore wind will be used for tidal as well. Some of the technologies in the manufacturing and the supply chain will be very similar. The blades look completely different, but ostensibly there's a large similarities between them. They're composite materials and they're kind of bonded. So there's some aspects there, but not yet. I think we're just too early for tidal. Although some areas on the West Coast are very open to that.
Okay, so Mark, there's another question from the Mark. I think it's a very important question, and it's open to all the kind of panel member. And I think it's all about whether there's internship opportunities available within the companies or organization sector you're working in, and what would be the career look like if someone goes on internship. And if there's no internship available, would there be any kind of voluntary basis experience for anyone who wants to kind of work with the your organization? So it's an open question for anyone, basically, mostly to do with internship and kind of voluntary experience.
I think with my mic open, I'll come in very, very quickly. Yep, the QR code will take you to several companies, and there may well be internships within these. As part of a recent government ask, I did ask for some funding to come down, and part of that funding was for internships, because I've realised it's so important to get individuals into the sector to try it, to gain experience. It's really, really valuable. And it's not often easy because they're large companies, there's a cost involved. How do we cover that cost? And how do we get up to minimum safety standards in order to work in that environment? So there may be someone in the QR code if you were to follow that.
Okay. Any other panelists who would like to? Yes, Liz.
Yeah, happy to come in on that one. So on the LANTRA careers pages, there are all the different job roles associated with our sector. And for each of those, there's also supportive organisations. So there's like certain links that you can click on to find different organisations. Certainly the larger organisations that tend to be in areas such as horticulture, but also agriculture, aquaculture, forestry. Those are the areas that will be more likely to have internships and those opportunities. There is the digital dairy chain, which is also worth looking at, particularly University of West Scotland, heavily involved in that area. And also Nature Scot often runs internships as well. So it's worth having a look within their pages, as well as Scottish Forestry and Forestry and Land Scotland.
Thank you, Liz. Zarina?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same. I was going to say the same as Liz there. So it's just like thinking about the environment, the bigger environmental organisations, because they have the resources, rather than smaller charity groups. They won't have resources for internships, but they have resources for like volunteers or even like entry-level jobs. And they can gain a lot of experience working with them. But thinking about like Nature Scotland, Scottish Wildlife Trust, Forestry Commission, these bigger, nature conservation organisations. The government, they have asked the government to invest more money into creating career pathways, because there is a recognition that there is a gap of people entering them, especially people from diverse and marginalised groups. So there is a push to get more internships into that sector. So just keep looking at the big environmental organisations.
Thank you, Zarina. Amy?
Yes, just to say from MA's point of view, so we have some existing partnerships with universities. So that's the main route, to be honest, that we currently offer internships. And it's kind of the main one is students can do their master's dissertation project as kind of a piece of research that's set within a subject area that we find we're wanting to do some more research on, basically. So that's our main option at the minute, but we're always open to new ones. If UWS has ways that you'd be interested in collaborating with us on, we'd definitely be keen to chat on that as well. So
Great, thank you. So more question there? Anyone would like to kind of come and chat? Okay, there's one more question in the chat. I can read it out. Okay, I have a question. As I got a good guidance from Mr. Nigel, highly appreciated, but here I need support to have more available guidance or advices I can use to get career on my major as a veterinarian without need to go through RCVS registration process. As you are financially, it doesn't work well for a full-time student, as it's very expensive to pay fees for the organization. On the other hand, there's lack of time, and I have to go through registration process as this is the time. Any sort of comment on that from someone?
Just that it's the RCVS that's the guidance, that's the rules. You can't circumvent them. It is a difficult process to go through. It's expensive, but it's obviously there are these organisations in place to ensure the well-being of the animals. So I would say that if you're wanting to become a vet, there are these set processes that you do have to go through. But I wouldn't be able to comment on any other ways around that.
Thank you. Any further comments? Stephen, yes.
I just wanted to firstly just thank everyone for coming along this afternoon. I think it was fascinating to hear all the talks and being able to answer all the questions there today. And I think one thing that stood out for me was certainly from all your career stories, how you can get into these fields without that immediately coming from a subject area. It's not a linear pathway. There's do lots of different things and you end up where you want to be a lot of the time, which I think is a really good takeaway from that. But it was probably a question I had kind of originally following what Dougie was saying around the skills needed within the offshore industry, and I think the sort of planning that's needed, forward planning that's needed to get the right people into those roles. And I thought I'd take the opportunity now because we've got people working within sustainability here across different sectors, which I think is fantastic. So just feeding off that and what Amy was saying about the skills needed for working within Mathew Algie, I just wanted to ask people where they thought maybe they saw skills gaps within your particular sectors just now. I know you did mention, Dougie, there were sort of skills gaps certainly with offshore, but I think what are the skills gaps that we're seeing just now? And just thinking how students might be able to try and get ahead a little bit by being able to develop themselves in some of these key areas. So yeah, just a bit of an overview of where these skills gaps might exist just now. Thanks.
Yes, Liz, you're first.
Okay, so the skills gap across our sector, largely associated with technical skills associated with each, as I'm sure you could imagine, which can be gained through some practical training. But the general ones that kind of sit across everything, good communication skills are always asked for. So being able to evidence that you're able to communicate well, follow instructions, but also good listening skills. I think that's definitely something that you want to be able to evidence in your application. Showing that you are able to work in a variety of different environments, you know, with all sorts of weathers for our area, for my sector in particular, is very important. And also data skills. It's becoming more and more the norm that a lot of the equipment, machinery that's being involved, there's more mapping that's involved within our sectors, more data that's being produced, but not always is there that understanding of how best to use that data and how to use that for the benefit of sustainability and reporting. So examples in your CV of how you have used data effectively to bring about a positive change that you can clearly demonstrate, so little case studies are really, really helpful to have.
Thank you, Liz. Zarina?
So the areas that we find that we struggle to get, I suppose, more support in is probably communication, especially in a world where communication and the way we communicate is forever evolving and changing rapidly. So it's like, how do we get the stories out there? So yeah, and especially when we've got like a very right-wing and fascist political change going on in the world, who have a lot of money to invest in communication. So how do we put out an alternative narrative? So for us, it's very much about that. Those communication skills are invaluable. And the other area is policy, thinking about like, how do we translate policy jargon into everyday work? But also the other way around, how do we make a change in policy as well, for the asks, for like everyday people's asks, so that policy advocacy campaign. And
sorry, Zarina, I think we are having a difficulty hearing you because yeah, so.
Right. And the other thing I would say is, the last thing is, it's the skill set that I would look for, and that is somebody who's a good communicator and networker.
Okay, thank you. Is there any more question from students and staff? Dougie, yes, any comment?
Yep, no, thanks. Just on the kind of skills gaps there, I completely echo what Liz was saying. The personnel skills, communication skills, data management are all totally required. And the areas that are immediately required, the kind of career areas with offshore wind and onshore wind for that part as well, is the planning and consenting side of things. It's like a project. We're at the start of the project, so first you have to plan it and get all the legalities covered first before you then go into production and it's built. So planning, consenting, which is geography, geology, environmental impact studies, all these sort of skills, project management, and then for the slightly longer term, it's anything with technology, anything engineering, but I would say particularly electrical. There seems to be a huge electrification of most systems. So whether you wanted to work with electric vehicles that need charging points, you need an electrical supply and planning that takes place to install that. Whether it's power generation, a lot of that's electrical. Some sort of chemical as well. Chemical sciences will be very, very useful. It is likely that we will produce so much electricity from wind that we don't know what to do with it. Some of that may go into hydrogen storage. It may go into other formats. So hydrogen could become important as well. We don't really know. And battery storage as well could be very, very important. If it gets a technological leap in battery technology, it could be that we change course. So we're heading down one path just now, but that may change as innovation and research becomes real, and things may form. But really it's personnel skills, it's the people. And when you're putting in applications, you have to kind of show your adaptability and your willingness to move within the sector and use your skills within that.
Thank you, Dougie. Amy?
Yeah, I definitely would agree with a lot of what's already been mentioned, but just to highlight particularly that ability to influence or persuade others. So for us, that's about influencing senior management team to make sure they understand the business case for decisions, but also then that influencing colleagues piece about behaviour change. Both of those things are really important for us. And then this is obviously very specific to MA, but for us, it's really useful to have some language skills as well. If you can speak Spanish, that's great for talking to coffee suppliers, obviously, but that's a very specific thing. It's something worth bearing in mind, though, if you're really passionate about a specific industry.
Thank you. I'm mindful of time. We have 13 minutes left exactly. So I have maybe 2 questions for the panel, if I can ask. The very general question, basically, what are the biggest challenges in sustainability that we're facing? And then from the future point of view, how do you see the role of sustainability evolving in next decade? So basically, it's looking at the challenging, but also looking at the kind of sustainability as a field, where we are heading. Are we expanding? Are we going to have kind of more, given there's a lot of kind of bad press going on right now, where we are heading for future? So anyone can open up. Yeah, Liz.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge at the moment is the cost of living aspect and the pressure that's put on increasing the sustainability, particularly around food, but also around some other materials that the sector is producing. And you only have to look at some of the shift within the media away from sustainability towards, the cost of living crisis. So I think the challenge is going to be keeping the sustainability high on the list of priorities of the consumer, as well as on making it clear to the consumer the benefits that that's bringing as well. So that's a kind of a big challenge for us at the moment.
Okay. Anyone else would like to comment?
Yep, certainly. I would say from the energy production side of things as well, the finances are absolutely key. At the end of the day, these are large energy companies. A lot of them have greenified themselves. They've moved into green energy. They moved away from fossil fuels. But if the shareholders are expecting profits, and the profits, it's less profitable within one area, it tends to divert back to where it was. So it's keeping that momentum going. Thankfully, we have got very ambitious government targets, and then they aren't just targets; they're actually, they're legal obligations. So hopefully, government can drive this forward through policy. But it's keeping the momentum going and doing it in a manner that's not only for sustainability, but it's sustainable. We need to put these measures into place. We need to have a skills mechanism with entry points and exit points that allows people to get into the industry to fill the skills gaps. Huge manufacturing industry in Scotland, which has got skills gaps, and that goes across to aerospace as well. So it's not just one sector; it's the whole skills sector just now is starting to suffer from the lack of skills, and a lot of them are kind of fishing from the same pond. So electrical engineers needed everywhere, civil engineers needed everywhere, environmental impact needed everywhere, data, we're into data science now is absolutely huge. We've got digital twins for systems that we need to monitor, and we've got big data coming through that needs to be analysed, artificial intelligence coming in as well. It's absolutely huge. I think it's a good problem to have. I really do. I think we're on the right lines. I think people in their hearts know that sustainability is absolutely key. If we look at global warming and even the weather outside just now, the climate change, how quickly it's changing, it is absolutely real. I remember 20 years ago or so hearing about climate change and global warming, and I didn't really see much of a difference. I absolutely do now. We've got extreme weather conditions, so it should be on everybody's agenda. And I think young people certainly have an appetite for that. So if we can create jobs with a sustainability theme in them and qualifications that have sustainability built in, so that there's a huge understanding, it gives us a chance, but big challenge going forward.
Thank you. I have a final question. I know I'm mindful of time. How can we make sustainability careers more accessible to everyone? And I think, as I said, this is for all the panel, but Zarina might be more kind of specific to you because you're doing quite a lot of inclusive work as well. So That's just like, how we can make, sustainability is kind of more accessible for everyone.
And a little bit of my answer links to like the first question that you asked as well. So I think one of the things that we find challenging is this idea of scarcity, that we live in a world of scarcity, and that we have to move away from that model, which is like what the political powers are giving us, this like narrative of like we have to do with less. And I think that is a challenge. And if we can change that frame into actually, if we have a more sustainable world and we carry out more environmental, better ways of living, it actually improves our lives. So it improves our health and well-being, it improves our quality of lives. And I think that's the key for us, is making it relevant to everyday life and everyday people's lives. It's like, actually, sustainability isn't an alternative. It's not an alternative lifestyle. It's not for the tree huggers. It's actually for everyday people. And if we're asking for like making sure that our electricity is coming from a place that it doesn't harm the planet, that's not been a radical. It's not been alternative. That's just been a caring person. So I think for us, it's very much about just bringing it back to home, bringing it back to making it relevant. And the other thing with working with marginalised and racialised communities is the connection, the global connection. That yes, we live in Scotland, the impact here might not be as devastating, but we're actually a part of a global community. And the impacts in other parts of the world are much more devastating, much more real. And it isn't something that's going to happen in the future. It's happening right now. So I think linking those stories is really important as well.
Thank you. We have final question in the chat. Someone said, yes, I agree that the pressure to meet net zero is overwhelming. From my understanding, businesses now buy carbon credits if they exceed their expected emissions. My question is, where is the fund going into? Is it for in renewable energy projects? Maybe Dougie, Liz, that might be kind of more connected to you. Where's the fund going for?
I don't have the answer for that one. I know that a lot of the money that was coming from the energy sector, from excess profits, was being taxed, and that was to go back into green energy. So a lot of the money that recently came in through the big players like Shell and BP was getting, rather than getting paid in taxes, was going back into green energy for that. But that's quite a difficult question about the carbon tax credits. I don't know. I know that some companies on an individual basis were claiming to be carbon zero by selling the carbon to a third party. But how that is being dealt with, I don't know. Carbon capture and use and storage is a fantastic concept. So if we can capture carbon, store it in a location, and then reuse it, that's kind of circles that. Let's not produce it in the first place, but if we have to produce some carbon, let's reuse that. That would be a great thing to do. But I'm not sure on the credits.
Can I jump in?
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, it's basically a case of companies buying carbon credits from a provider. So there's a global availability of credits that are that basically are coming from a variety of projects. So that's the main reason that they've become, well, the first reason they've become controversial is ideally companies should be reducing their own emissions, not just buying credits from elsewhere to offset their emissions. So that's why there's been this massive shift from companies talking about being carbon neutral to moving towards, hopefully, companies now talking to their agenda for becoming net zero. And that means they have to reduce their own emissions as far as possible before they consider any kind of offsetting of any kind. So if you're thinking about a company's approach, if they're talking about carbon neutral, it's something worth investigating. Ideally, companies would be talking about having a net zero ambition, not be talking about carbon neutral at this point. The other thing is that obviously there's a wide spectrum of credits available on the market, and they have come under significant scrutiny in the press for various reasons, just in terms of what is it that they claim, how are they measuring that removal of carbon, and also any kind of social impacts. A lot of credits have also come under fire for any unexpected social impact things that might have been involved in the credits, as well as been, human rights abuses and different things linked to some credits and purchase. So it's a fascinating area to research in, but a bit of a minefield because it's not regulated at the moment.
Thank you so much. I wish we had more time, but the time is closing now. We only have kind of 4 minutes left now, so I think I have to kind of close the session here. And before we kind of close, a big thank you to our panelists for sharing their experiences. And I think it's been wonderful hearing all of 4 of you to very inspiring discussion, very kind of the enlightening for students, but also for myself as well. I think coming from the kind of teaching perspective, education perspective, and I think the work you guys are doing is really kind of impactful. And I think that needs to be kind of highlighted, maybe on social media as well, LinkedIn. People need to know, what's going on and how much difference you are making in the kind of society. I think all we can agree that sustainability is a very growing field. And from the panelists, I've realized there are many opportunities. And I think all of 4 panelists have kind of indicated that there are opportunities for students, for graduates, for anyone kind of looking to kind of they go into sustainable kind of practices career. And I think the discussion has been really kind of helpful. And I think for students, you have to kind of explore internship, maybe network, maybe connect with people through LinkedIn, maybe send them email, to show your interest, show your passion, that you want to be kind of bring that change. And I think it's all about making yourself kind of connecting with the people. And the more you connect, I think people will help you kind of in the right direction. And think about the skills that we have discussed, within the session. Try to kind of work on a skill. Maybe in the university, you're part of the university. I think you can, they connect with maybe lecturers through your courses, assessment, with our careers team, with Nigel, Lindsay. They're all there to kind of help you. So I think it's all about connecting with them. As I wish I had more time because there's so many kind of questions. It's such an interesting field, but I have to kind of close this session here. And thank you again to our panelists, and thank you again, Nigel and Lindsay, for kind of organizing this whole session. Nigel, you want to close the session? Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just say a few words before we finish up. But firstly, to thank yourself, Muzammal, for chairing the session so well. And thank you very much to the panel. Obviously, I hadn't actually realised the sort of the breadth of the panel, in the sense of, we covered third sector, we covered public sector, we covered sort of the private sector, and it's quite nice to have that kind of that coverage. But really, thank you very much for answering all the questions. Thank you for your brief introductions as well. I think the session has been, so informative, and it's sort of, it's grappling with some difficult debates as well. It's not a case of, these aren't straightforward answers, are they? They're quite complex. So yeah, I think it's been a great session, and thank you very much for your involvement, and students too for your questions. I have put up a link for feedback from students. If you would like to click the link and respond to, I think there's 3 pages of 3 pages, three questions. That would be great if you have time to do that. And just generally, thank you very much to everybody.
Okay, Doug. Thank you so much. Have a nice afternoon, and hopefully we'll connect again, maybe through social media, through LinkedIn. So we will connect again. Again, thank you to our panel, students and organizers. Really have a good day.